Well, let's speak to Professor Michael Clarke, our security and defence analyst, for his thoughts on this. Professor Clarke, what do you make of what you've seen President Trump write in that Truth Social post? It's on track, he says.
Yeah, well, it's better than some of the alternatives that we might have anticipated. And clearly, when he says that the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor will give a more detailed readout, he obviously, I mean, as our correspondent was saying, he's obviously more concerned now to get this right in terms of the details. Some very wild things are being said in the last 24 hours and differences in interpretation and so on. And so we head towards Sunday and Steve Witkoff going to Jeddah to see if they can take this forward. And there's obviously very intensive work going on between the White House and the Kremlin over details. But the fact is, it's still the case that the United States wants a quick deal. They want a quick ceasefire agreed for 30 days. That gives them breathing space to think of something new after that. And the Kremlin wants to slow this down because they really don't want to stop fighting because Putin thinks he's doing well on the ground. I don't think he's doing as well as he thinks he is, but it doesn't matter. He thinks he's doing well, so he doesn't want a ceasefire. So we're still dealing with that sort of discrepancy between what both sides want. And interestingly, both sides stressed yesterday the other issue here, which is the strategic partnership between Russia and the United States. They're both keen on it, and both of them regard Ukraine as a problem to be disposed of, not a just peace to be arrived at or a war to be stopped, but an irritation to the bigger picture of a strategic partnership between Russia and the United States.
And that's your analysis from the telephone call between Trump and Putin yesterday. This thing moves so quickly that we move on from that call and how consequential that was. That's where they kind of agreed to a very limited ceasefire. What's happened in the time since that call between the two and where we are now?
Yeah, since last night, I mean, things have happened. So this prisoner exchange took place, and so 175 prisoners each side have exchanged. But, I mean, that's the 58th exchange. There have been 57 exchanges of prisoners so far. So this is number 58. So fine, 350 people have been released from one side or the other. That's all good, but it's not turning the dial strategically. The ceasefire that they talked about, this limited ceasefire, not to attack energy infrastructure. And his question, is it energy infrastructure or energy and infrastructure targets? There's still ambiguity about that. But there have been attacks overnight. So the Ukrainians were attacked in Kiev and Sumy. There were big attacks around Slavyansk, and Slavyansk was without power and had power cut off during the night. And equally, the Ukrainians have attacked in Kursk. They've attacked in Krasnodar, the Kavkazsky oil refinery in Krasnodar, which is quite a big target, which they've attacked, I think, before. And the Ukrainians have kept on attacking the oil refineries because they're trying to deprive or upset the refining capacity of Russia to produce petrol. And they've been fairly successful in that, which is why this little bit of ceasefire that they've agreed is actually more advantageous to Russia than it is to Ukraine. Ukraine are coming out of the winter and they've got through the worst of it, even though they've lost about 80% of their energy capacity in the short term. The Russians actually need this break more than the Ukrainians do, because they were suffering, really suffering, from this attack, regular attack on the oil refining areas. So that's where we are with it. But there's lots of critical national infrastructure that might be attacked in Ukraine, lots of energy infrastructure. It's a big country. A lot of it derives from the Dnieper River. And as you'd expect, I mean, there's the Dnieper River running from north to south, divides the country 1/3 to the east and 2/3 to the west. And we've got the Zaporizhia power plant, of course, which is right on the river, the thermal power plant, the Dnipro thermal power plant above it, the Kaniv, the storage power station, the South Ukraine nuclear power plant, almost as big as Zaporizhia, the South Ukraine nuclear power plant, very important, and the Novokakhovka Dam, which the Russians blew over 12 months ago now. And all of those are just a selection of the really important potential targets that, in theory, should now be exempt.
I was going to say, that may now be exempt from being struck. But, as you say, the Russians want to kind of slow roll this process. As we remember, the Ukrainians have agreed to this 30-day ceasefire. So where do we see this happening? What do we see happening now over the next 30 days, do we think? Starting with those talks, I guess, in Riyadh.
Yeah, I mean, I think this... In the sense that Zelenskyy has said, look, we've agreed without preconditions. We've agreed, I mean, they've been put in a position where they had to agree, but he said no preconditions. There are all sorts of things that matter to us, and we've said what they are, and I keep saying what they are, and we want security guarantees. But we've agreed tonight, tomorrow, the day after, a 30-day ceasefire starting whenever you agree it. The Russians have still got all these conditions in place. Some of them are quite limited, some of them are huge, including to deal with the core issues, our core concerns, which is everything the Russians have been complaining about for the last 10 years or more. And so what the Russians are saying is until you deal with all of our problems, you can't have a 30-day ceasefire. And the question is that, you know, how much patience have the Americans got to play this game? The Russians are very good at this game. And remember, as I keep saying, Putin's an old KGB man. He's been doing this all his career. I mean, he knows how to do all of this. I'm not sure the Americans, with their business background, are really so accomplished at this sort of thing. You know, the business community want to move in, make a quickish deal and move on. Yeah. But in political terms, these things can go on for a very long time. And so it's Russia's calculation, Putin's calculation. How long can he needle Trump into more and more concessions? And what will he get? Or will Trump turn on him and say, enough?
Well, that was going to be my question. What do you think of the idea that Trump would turn? Because it surely will get to at some point, if the Russians do keep slow rolling it, that it becomes blindingly obvious to everyone that they are clearly not trying to come about to peace.
That might happen. And if it looked to Trump that he was being made a complete fool of, then that would hurt him. And he's capable of turning on a sixpence, or in his case, turning on a dime. So we know that. So it's not impossible, but nothing that has happened so far indicates it's very likely either. At the moment, the Americans look as if they're giving ground all the time to these Putin demands. So the longer it goes on, the bigger the turnaround will be if it turns out to happen. And so we'll see. But there's, I mean, poor, you know, the man in the middle there with the very determined expression is the one, Zelenskyy, is the one with the least power in all of this. And he's a bystander while this interesting game of psychology and diplomacy goes hand in hand. I mean, one on the left, the psychological master. I mean, Putin is very good at spotting the weaknesses in everyone he deals with and playing on their weaknesses. And for President Trump, he lives in the moment. And all of his politics are about him. He sees power as a personal thing, not as institutional. And he sees relationships as a relationship between him and another leader, him and another person. He personalises all relationships. And the fact is, he likes Putin, he just likes him, and he just dislikes Zelenskyy for all sorts of reasons.
Always appreciate your analysis. Professor Clarke, thank you for that.